Thank you for joining the January 14th, 2020 VOLTA call. Just a reminder to everyone that our meetings are public and recorded, and we do post them to our YouTube channel after the meeting concludes. So please be mindful of that during discussions and presentations today. So today we have just a few items to go over before we're planning to have some discussion. The first topic, which we usually cover on Tuesdays, is reviewing non-brigade related JIRAs that have come in over the past week. And I believe there are two of them. One of them may actually be covered on stabilization, but I'm not sure. And then seeing if we have any all discuss items flagged. Prior to the start of the call, we did not have any, but we'll do another check before we move on from that topic. And then the main item for today will have a presentation from Dev Malya. With that, let me go ahead and we'll jump over to the first two JIRAs that looked non-brigade related. 2428 is the first one, determine if tool versioning via Docker is practical. So this is one that Kent has been taking a look at. I believe there's some VOLTA Discuss thread on that as well. And it may have been kicked off, I think, from a stabilization call. But at this point, I don't think the epic is tracked under stabilization. So not sure if we've got, I don't think we have Kent on today. So yeah, David, is this a topic?
He's under the weather.
Okay, yeah.
Is it a topic for what?
Is this a topic for this call, or do you think it would be handled more on stabilization or just be able to discuss?
We can handle this call as well. I just brought it up there because I had talked to Ken and I thought, hey, I'll bring it up on my call as well.
Yeah, okay.
It's perfectly reasonable to do it here. The update really is, as it was in the email, that he's done kind of a proof test with the Proto-C compiler. His one concern was that it has about a second startup time, which is fine if you're doing one file, but if you're doing a loop of 100 files, that's 100 seconds and time starts to add up. And so he's going to look into if that can be mitigated by doing the loop inside the container instead of outside the container. I asked him after the stabilization call, because Scott brought up on the call that he didn't recollect that we did it per file. Ken's response was to the effect that I think we did do it per file in the old way as well, but he'll be looking into ways to, again, mitigate the issue. But I think as a proof point, it does prove that we can run these tools in a container, and then we can have, the hope being that we'll get more repeatable results across different people as everybody starts using the same version.
Thanks, David. Any questions from the group? Okay, we had one other item, Vol 2457. Let me jump up to that one. And this one is some modifications required for support of an additional ONT vendor type, support for CIRCOM ONU using the Open ONU adapter. And this one was opened by Amit and being worked by him as well. It looks like there may be some changes in the OMCI ME config in the ONU needed in the Open ONU adapter so that this version of the ONU can work with VOLTA. So I'm not sure if we have an epic yet for items like this. So I'll try and look at that offline, see if I have a place to put this one.
And those changes to support this new ONU aren't going to unsupport existing ONUs?
And that's part of the other note in here as well, that they need to be backwards compatible so we don't break anything else.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Any comments or questions from the group? Okay, so those were the two items that I'd seen that appeared to be non-brigade related or non-brigade specific. And I don't see any new issues that have come in. We'll take a quick look at the dashboard, see if we've got any ones that have been flagged for all discuss, and I do not see any at this time. So I think that'll bring us over to our main topic today, which would be the presentation from Dev Malya. I believe I saw Dev Malya join. Would you like me to give you presentation rights?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, you should have them in a moment.
Yeah, can you see my screen, everyone?
Yes.
Is it just me,
can
or
see
is
it
the
now.
audio just terrible? Could be just me.
Sean,
Could
I
be
think
me.
it's you. I think you actually
Yeah.
cracking. Your voice actually cracking.
Yeah, so can I go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so today what I have is not actual presentation, but I have some queries that I would like to clear. So as you know that for event filtering there is an ongoing review going. So during that review, I got some comments like how the filters should be reconciled and how they're and the requirement and if we whether we require an event filtering agent or not. So I would like to talk about the reconcile first. So uh, to do reconcile, there could be two ways. The adapter can query the KV code, or the adapter could query the code to get the filters. So so one way, so but to do that, like if we keep one copy of filters for the adapters, and then if we want to do reconcile for the code, we would have to keep a separate copy of the filters because the path are different for the adapter and the code. So I would like to ask if keeping two copies of filters is a good thing, or we should avoid that. Do you have any opinion on that?
In the document, you talk about on adapter restart, it should query the core for what filters it should be using.
Yeah, I would like to propose that.
So yeah, whether it queries the core or just knows the right place in the KV store to look at it, that's fine. I don't think my personal opinion is I don't think the adapters should be keeping their own copy.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, we mean, I guess I want to draw the distinction between the adapters keeping a persistent copy or the adapters keeping just a temporary copy. You know, like the adapters know to keep a copy of, I suppose, flows, for example, that is not persistent, that's just reconciled on restart and kept in memory. Is that correct?
Yeah, persistent storage in the KV store.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I favor treating these event filters just like we treat any other adapter state that the adapter has. That when you restart the adapter, it's reconciled. But
Yeah,
we're not making a stateful adapter. We're still just pulling it from the core on restart.
yeah, so getting the filters from the code would be a good thing in case of adapter restart.
Yeah, that's my opinion. Does anyone have a contrary opinion?
Well, on the restart, we're pulling a lot of things from the core, so it does make sense to also pull the filters.
Another thing which I was thinking about, keeping the filters in the device structure. So by doing that, we will have only one copy of filters in the KV store, but that will have its own implication. It will overload the device structure. So I was trying to avoid keeping it in the device structure. So
yeah, what would be the benefit of keeping it in the device structure?
so if we keep the filters in the device structure, so if the adapter goes down and when it comes back, it will do a get device, and by doing that get device, it will also get the filters associated with the device.
We're doing per device filters.
Yeah. So it won't have to fetch from any other location.
So one thing is, I do wonder if we want the capability to do filters that span devices as well. If someone wanted to turn off, you know, a particular class of message across all devices and did not want to have to go through and enumerate each and every device and set a filter on it. So I wonder if we do need this to be separate from devices for that purpose. If we do have that use case to turn off globally a particular event.
I would almost expect that to be the more common use case, that I want to see all blank events.
Yes, even I would think so. Mask a particular set of alarms, say, ONU discoveries. You're probably debugging, and you just want to, debug only active ONUs and not allow any more ONUs in the system. You probably would want to mask all the ONU discoveries or something like that.
So in that case, I don't think keeping filters in the device structure would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, yes, I would think so. So this is one use case that I was talking about. I'm sure there are more.
One big advantage is in having it in the device structure. It's when there's a request coming in, like in the case of reconcile, there's one request in the KV store to get the device, and then it bring it down to the adapter. If we put it as a generic way, and if I look at the format that you have, where services and the services, VOLTHA, event filters, device ID, then whenever there's a request, we'll have to go in the KV store twice, potentially retrieving the device and then retrieving the device ID. And if we have anything generic and then we want to pull that, then we potentially need to go to the KV store and pull out everything on event filtering and send that information down.
Well, can event filtering be pulled in and kept in memory? Is it going to be that large?
That's my question. I don't know.
So the filters will be on a per device basis. Like if you do on filtering on overall devices, what we have, so each devices could pull its own filters and keep it in their device handler. That could be one way.
Okay, I promised myself I'd be quiet, but I can't. Do we really need per device filtering? Is this something that we can say, look, let's just get filtering based on filter class, get that working, and when there is someone who actually is using the product in production says, you know what, I can't use it without per device filtering, then we think about that. Are we over engineering this? And I promised to be quiet about it, but I couldn't.
I agree with David. I also wonder what is the use case of doing a filter per device.
I thought there was a DT requirement somewhere that came from this. We've gone back and forth about this a couple times, and there was a time when we thought we didn't need it, and then it came back. In terms of per device, I think there will be a point where we'll need to be doing per device tracing, whether that ultimately flows northbound or not, but there will be a point where per an ONU, we will need to know specifically what it's doing if it's misbehaving on the network.
I agree with that, but again, and this goes to the other discussion, right? We can filter out that information on the back end. It doesn't have to be filtered out on the front end.
Sure. But if we decide we want to turn on OMCI tracing and 1,000 ONUs worth of OMCI all flood northbound, I think that might be more than we might want.
I'm not sure.
And it would be like packet capture, right? It would be like saying I want to turn on packet capture and then put all the packet capture data for a 100 gig interface on a Kafka bus. You no longer have a Kafka bus at that point.
Again, I guess do you filter it on per device, or do you say you filter it on something else like a certain OMCI message? My concern is filtering a never-ending story, right? Oh, today we want it on device, tomorrow we want it on device plus transaction ID. The day after that, we want it on device transaction ID plus, phase of the moon, whatever, right? I don't know. I'm not convinced, but.
And I guess what are the events that we're filtering? Is there a defined set of what that is? It sounds like it's not just alarms and events. It may also be, OMCI messages or some other kind of messages. Is there a list of what the events are?
Yeah, so I see them as things that proceed northbound out of VOLTA. So we do have, for example, we have the VOLTA events Kafka channel. It has alarms, it has PMs, and it just has, like important state changes that the northbound consumer might be concerned with. I don't think this would be used as a mechanism for turning off particular OMCI messages, because I think that's an internal thing that happens rather than something proceeding externally.
I agree with that. I think that level of tracing stays local to the cluster. So yeah, there's a distinction here between events that are northbound worthy in general, and then let's say tracing, debug logging, tracing type activities that have no business going northbound because of the impact the volume would cause.
Yeah, and logging is I believe is an entirely different, although perhaps related discussion to this one. So we have other developers working on a logging solution right now for dynamic configuring logging and potentially filtering logging at the source and such. And that's logging is separate from events. So I think DevMalia's mechanism doesn't need to have that necessarily in scope, although maybe we do have some of the same root concerns about filtering at the source versus filtering later.
Yeah,
So for device filters, are we in a way saying that we just have an on and off switch, where if it's on, we send events. If it's off, just don't send anything?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too.
Yeah, so each filter will have an enable bit, enable variable associated with it. So if that variable is true, then the filter will be active, and if it is false, then it will be inactive. So it will allow the event to go onto the Kafka bus. So I can create a filter and set it as false, and I can allow the particular event to go into the Kafka bus.
But would you control it like an on-off on a per device level?
Yeah, everything is per device at the moment.
But I think there's a distinction here. I thought Ken was talking about is, hey, rather than have on this device, I want to filter this type of event, it's either this device is sending events or not sending events.
Right.
Yep, that's what I meant. It's instead
So
of
it's an
having
all or, right. So it's an all or nothing. It's an on-off switch on the send events or not send events per device, as opposed to be able to filter device or specific events on a given device.
Okay, so what you mean is that you create a filter and apply to all the devices. That's what you meant, right?
No, it's a filter per device. It's if I turn it on, whatever event you have on that device, you send it up. If I turn it off, nothing gets sent up.
Okay.
So my concern with that would be, what if there's a misbehaving device and someone wants to squelch it, but they would still like to know if that device is removed or some other important event with that device. Maybe all events are not equal, and you want to squelch the noisy ones, but there's still some that you want to pay attention to. I think it's hard for us to assume what the operator requirements that are driving this are without having the operator tell us those requirements. I think we're trying to bake in assumptions on what those requirements are, and it'd be better if someone would just tell us.
That's fair, but I guess what I'm looking for from operators is not, hey, I want device filtering, right, or device event filtering. what are you trying to accomplish? And then we can bring that back as an engineering team and say, okay, this is their goal. This is the problem they're trying to solve. What are the ways to solve it? Event filtering may be one of those, but it may not be the one we want to do. And so to me, a requirement isn't I need per device event filtering. That's an implementation. There's another requirement, and I need to know what that is to really understand what the best way forward is. That make sense? Or am I just way off base?
Yeah, I think you and I are in agreement with this. You know, requirements drive implementation. So we have the assumption that there was a requirement that drove Devmalia's proposal, though perhaps we've mentally lost context on what that exact requirement was. It'd be nice to have it explicitly stated to make sure that this is the right implementation to take care of that requirement, and some other implementation wouldn't be better. I mean, I would kind of hope after reviewing this work previously that we did decide this was the right way to go and we had our reasons, but it'd be nice to bring it full circle back to the operator and find out what they wanted and make sure that we are delivering that in the most efficient way.
As I said, I was trying to keep quiet. It just, I can't, in my mind, resolve back to what the original requirement was. And so at least I need a refresher on it.
Hi, this is Amit. So what we're talking about here is on the northbound interface, should the filtering be on a per device basis or across all devices? But I think the point what we started talking about was what happens between the core and the adapter, right? So on that interface, it has to be on a per device basis because we don't have a broadcast medium between the core and the adapter instances.
I didn't quite follow that. I'm sorry. Can you try that again?
Yeah, so what I was trying to say is that on the northbound interface, I think there is an open question saying that whether the filtering should be on a per device basis or across all devices. But the aspect that we started about was that what happens or how is the event filter transferred from the core to the adapter?
To the what? To the adapter?
On that
Okay.
interface, it has on a per device basis.
Yeah, we can also have
because there isn't a
Why does it have to be on a per device basis when it goes from the core to the adapter?
Else how do we send the message to? The message would be addressed to whom? We don't have a broadcast mechanism, right, from the core to the adapter instances.
It's something, it's an easy thing to send in the sense of, for example, like we can publish a message for a specific adapter topic, and the adapter will just read from that. So it's there are ways to do broadcasts. It's similar to the way that when an adapter starts up, it broadcasts a register message, and whatever core is listening to that will register that adapter. It's in the same fashion.
Yeah, but we also need to take into account that these devices could be ONU devices. And then if you have a lot of ONUs, then this broadcast would be picked up by each of those instances.
That would be picked up by the adapter. So there's a limited set of adapters, and it's the adapter that will need to act on those filters, if those are not device-specific filters. I am answering the right questions.
So again, even how we transfer configuration from API to core to adapter implementation, I'm still back to what are we trying to accomplish? And again, if it's my memory and someone can, smack me over the head with a hammer, great. But I'm trying to understand what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, what Matt gave as an example of the ONU stuff. You're trying to debug an OMCI exchange. And so you want to be able to see that OMCI exchange. Is that kind of the use case you're talking about, Matt?
That specific one, yes. I consider that one to be more in line with tracing, and none of that messaging should go northbound in any situation.
Okay.
Yeah, that sort of belongs in the scope of the logging discussion, which I think is a whole nother discussion on people have varying opinions over whether it should be done at the source or done later. But
And I guess
think
maybe
go ahead, Matt.
The question here is eventing and tracing being conflated in the scope or the requirements, right? Maybe people see events as, oh, I want to turn on per device tracing and have those show up northbound, when in reality, it may not make sense for any of that to show up northbound.
So yeah, so again, it comes back to, what type of events are we talking about here? Are we talking about, device up, device down? And is it worth, in terms of the volume and type of events we're dealing with, to have device filtering to accomplish the end goals of the carrier, the provider? If we can, if that's answered, and I'm just forgetful, that's one, someone can smack me over the head offline and tell me here's the reason, and then we can talk about implementation. But are we at the point, or is everybody but me at the point where we're okay with this and we understand the business requirement and why this is the best implementation of that business requirement, and now we're talking implementation? Or is there anybody else as confused as me?
So as best as I can recollect, I recall some discussions in the past about misbehaving devices and the concern that a misbehaving device could flood the event bus with events that are unnecessary. Some state constantly flipping back and forth. We don't have the hysteresis in place, and we just get a flood of messages from some misbehaving ONU, and then someone wants to squelch that ONU so it no longer overwhelms the event bus. That's, it seems like this is a performance optimization to make the bus perform best by removing information from it. So to have a performance concern, you first have to have the situation where you're overutilizing your resource. If you're not overutilizing it, then you don't care. You can always filter later. So you must start with the assumption that somehow you're flooding this bus and want to turn something off. And that's the only thing I can think of, is that a misbehaving device has flooded the bus.
Right, and so that goes back to, I think, Ken's suggestion. You're really talking about a squelch, which basically says, look, I don't need per event type filtering or per device per event type filtering. What I'm really doing is saying, here's a blacklist. Don't send events for this black items on this blacklist. And that's very different than what we've been talking about in terms of implementation so far.
Yeah, I'm not sure it is all that different. If we went back to Devmalia's proposal, this is basically a list of filters, a blacklist, you could say, of device IDs together with what messages should be blocked. I mean, you're proposing it's sort of a binary for all messages for the device, completely filter this ONU. Devmalia has the granularity where you can filter particular kinds of messages for an ONU. Yeah. So I think the discussion comes down to what granularity is required by the operator, and would a simple bit in the device struct be sufficient, or do we need this more programmable filter?
It would also be good to know what kind of events, messages, PMs, whatever it is, that potentially could flood the bus in the event of a failure.
I think it's almost fear of the unknown, though, right? We don't know what the failure could be, but we're assuming some failure case where the bus is just going to get clogged. That's the assumption. That a correct assumption? I suspect that would be fear driven from existing capabilities where, I put things on the network where all of a sudden it just starts spewing junk, and now everything's going wrong, and I need to get it off the network as quick as possible. I mean, I've done that from an operations point of view. I think most people probably have. So I get that. And so there's this built-in fear that I put something new in my system. This is something that's bit me in the past. I want to prevent it.
So maybe we need to be specific. Then maybe we can say, things like link up, link down, EAP success, EAP fail, DHCP success, DHCP fail. None of those I could see, becoming like a debug level flood, right? Those I would think if a link is flapping, how many times are we talking a second that a link could possibly flap? That scenario I think is probably the most specific I can think of. Anything else that would be any more volume would be in the realm of trace, which again has no business being here at all. Which to me lends towards more of a global set of types of events that we want to let out. Let's say I want to let link up, link down out for everything. And rest assured that we are not going to flood the bus with link up, link down messages.
And other than that, we also cannot allow operator to filter some events because the upper layer applications will probably do something with that events. This cause the operation of the system. You cannot block on a discovered event or something like that on Kafka VAST.
That's very true. If the northbound systems are relying on events and all of a sudden those events are squelched, northbound systems start having problems.
So maybe another way to look at this is from an initial pass at this, would it just be easier to have this be managed at a global level? I mean, does that just make this easier across the board for a first pass?
What do you mean by global managed at the global level?
Meaning we don't do per device filtering of events. We have an event and a set of events filtering that is across the entire pod. Link up, link down. I want to see all the time or none of the time, or EAP success. I want to see all the time or none of the time. For every time.
And as David said, we can add simply a blacklist of the devices, blacklisted devices, so we can eliminate these events from these devices only.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be a second pass. That could be a first pass, a global event filtering mechanism, and then a second pass of version 2 would be a way to, like you said, turn on and off all events for any ONU device, OLT device.
And again, one of my concerns when you get down to per device filtering and even a blacklist at some point is you have an ever-growing list of ONU IDs, and that's just, that data needs to be managed, right? How do we offboard an ONU so that it's no longer necessary or anywhere, right? If I take an ONU from one place and it's blacklisted and I put it I put it on a shelf for 2 weeks and pull it out of a shelf for a new customer and put it in, but it's blacklisted, I don't see events for it, right? So how's this data cleaned up so the system behaves in a predictable manner? And that's one of my real concerns about per device filtering.
Sure, and there are other situations like this, I think, too. I mean, even in the CIBA whitelist, we have the same problem where now it's just the responsibility of northbound to, keep up with the database that is VOLTHA in certain API instances, cleaning up a whitelist or removing ONUs that are dead. And maybe that requirement just punts northbound.
As long as that data doesn't grow to the point where it is overwhelming VOLTHA.
I mean, I agree. I mean, there's just a point, though, where you can only do so much autonomously before some northbound system has to do its job.
Well, that's why I say if you don't do device filtering, you don't worry about it. But okay.
So I mean, are you saying no filtering at all? Literally just
no per device filtering.
No per device. Yeah, I guess. I mean, again, coming back to a first pass at this, may be just easier to have global device, global pod, global stack, event filtering that is not specific per device, and then in operating this and then kind of cycling on it in that way, maybe we realize there's a very specific case where it does make sense to blacklist events that we didn't realize we were going to get.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the fear of a network device flooding everything, right? I get that. It's just, I look at the scheme of the problems that VOLTHA has today to make it into production. And I'm like, you know what? We can't even delete an OLT. Am I really worried about events right now? You know, or per device event filtering?
So do we have consensus then that we do at least want the global filters? So filters based on event classes and types that apply to all device IDs, not per device, but global per event class filters. Does anyone think we do not want that?
You really want me to talk? Again, I'm more of the back filter on the back end, not the front end.
Yeah, I want a David filter. Yeah. Let me squelch you.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, let me say, does anyone feel this is too burdensome to implement? You know, a filtering mechanism that is based on types of events, not types of devices. It seems like that's a relatively low bar on design modification to VOLTHA. So we could proceed with that part, and that involves a lot of the work that Malia has done. There'll be protos for event filters, and there'll be a reconciliation mechanism to download the event filters from the core to the adapters. It's just that rather than have a device ID in the event filter, it'll have a star that says all devices.
You know, why can't device ID be treated as another field in the filter? Let's not have a per device filter, but device ID could also be, you know, a field or a filter. And does that not work?
Yeah, device ID is part of the filter structure.
I don't understand that. I'm putting a device ID in the filter structure.
Sorry, so the debate here was that, you know, let's not have a per device filter, and let's have, you know, generic filter parameters, and the filter engine would filter the events based on these parameters. So if we have device ID as also one of the match fields, so that would actually filter out, you know, you could have device ID and then, you know, a particular event, say ONU LOS. So that would filter out ONU LOS for that particular device ID. So wouldn't that, you know, achieve the functionality that we need?
That makes sense to me.
Then we're back to device level filtering.
Kind of, but if event itself has a field like device ID, then okay. You don't have to carry this information per device, this filtering information per device to adapters or anywhere else.
But you are. I don't think the debate, well, in my mind, the debate was never really about, do we keep the filter on the device structure? There's going to be this structure for the filters, and all you're saying is now the filter structure has a placeholder for a list of devices. It's an implementation choice.
Yeah, but as a first pass, like Matt was saying, it really doesn't hurt. I mean, I'm all for making some progress on this, and you know, let's try it. If there's a problem, we can revisit it. But you know, like Scott was saying, you can have a star for the device ID, and then that means that filter will apply to all devices. Or you can have a device ID field in there to, you know, just do it for that particular device. As a first pass, I don't think this is going to hurt anyone, and we can revisit it if it seems like it's not working.
It's not a simple star or a single device, though. I want this device filter on 12 of them. So it's actually a device ID list.
I think that would be a list of filters in the proposed implementation. So
if I wanted to filter the same event off 12 devices, I'd have 12 filters.
Sure. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know that we have to get this perfect.
Well, hold on. One instance of VOLTHA right now is supposed to be only for one device, isn't it? Oh, are we talking about ONU devices?
Yes.
Okay.
At least in my mind, I am.
I take it back. Yeah. I take it back.
Yes, if you want to do for 10 devices among 512 devices, yes, you probably would need to create 10 filters.
Is it worthwhile viewing the OLT logical switch as a device, and then you can apply filters to unis, right? And then enable, disable on a per ONU basis. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, well, sorry, I didn't get the point.
So if we have a logical device, which is the OLT adapter itself, right, and it has interfaces which represent unis. I mean, so if I want to apply filters to specific unis, I can do it via that device, right?
Okay, so yeah, so that can work. I'll be here at my desk the whole time, so that would be fine.
So I apply a filter to a device, but if that filter actually is on an ONU, I apply a filter to device, and as part of that filter, I specify the ONUs or unis on which I want it to apply.
No, I specify the device that represents the logical switch of the OLT,
right.
And I specify an interface which represents a uni.
That's fine, but so if I want to do it on multiple unis, would I have an event per uni or a filter per uni, or would I have one filter that's tied to the logical device and then associated with a list of unis?
The latter, right?
Does it not all amount to the same thing, whether we talk about logical device with unis or just devices?
Well, the difference is if it's applying to multiple unis, it'd be a list, so it wouldn't be a filter per uni. There'd be one filter per device and then a list of the unis that it applies to. It's still a data management nightmare from my point of view, either way, right? And I still come back to it's going to clutter up the data space. As you know, in our simple test cases where unis are fairly static, OLTs obviously are fairly static, not going to be an issue. In production, I'm envisioning relatively a lot of churn around, particularly uniports, ONUs, and I just see the management of the data not easy.
But I mean, is this just a matter of how you use it, right? We don't want to completely prevent misconfiguration, right? Because we'll never completely prevent misconfiguration. If the tool is flexible enough to do either or, and you use it the right way, then good on the operator for making the right decision. But if you can misconfigure it and do a lot of per uni, per ONU event filters and clutter up your database, flexibility is a double-edged knife.
Yeah. No, my issue comes back to what I said earlier, right? I'm worried about ONU churn, and if ONU churn isn't a reality, that's a different story. I'm completely off base then. But my issue is I'm going to have records in the database make no more sense because the ONU was shelved. And again, I don't know how often that's going to happen, but that's the kind of the data cleanup aspect keeps going in my mind, and that is my main concern. However, if everybody wants to say, look, we're going to create a filter and each filter has a device ID to which it's associated with, fine. I think that's going to be a very compute intensive lookup, because that means every time I get event X, I have to then find out, give me all the list of filters for event type X, now go through there and see if my device ID is on one of them. I think from an implementation point of view, that's not the quickest way to look up a filter. So I'm not sure that mechanism, or at least storing the events in that way, the filters in that way, is going to be the most efficient way to find a filter. So
well, if it's a single event with a set of devices, right? And all you have to do is look up if your device is in that set.
Right, but that's not what we originally talked about. We talked about if
Right.
I have the same event on 12 different devices, I have 12 filters.
12 filters. Yeah, I know. So now we're debating, is it, what do you think, Scott or Devmalya? Is it, if it's a single event with a set of devices to blacklist on, or rather, is that more efficient?
Yeah, I don't see that making a big difference. I mean, I think, we talk about how we put this in the database, and then I have an implicit assumption, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but that this number of filters will fit in memory. Then it becomes, an implementation decision on how you do this match. And let's assume you make a hash table. Then it's not inefficient to, submit my device ID against an in-memory hash table and see if I have a filter rule for it. For as far as one filter per device rather than a filter per multiple devices, I think of things like I think network filters. Typically if you want to filter IP addresses, that's like a separate rule per filter when you're configuring your firewall. I guess that's the precedent I'm thinking. Let's try to keep the data structure as simple as possible. You have one filter, it specifies, an event class to filter, and it specifies a device ID to filter, with the possibility that device ID could be star, and it's a wild card.
So when I'm configuring this as an operator, is my mentality or my kind of operation is on device X, I want to filter event ABC, or is my mentality filter a event on device X, filter B event on device X, filter C event on device X?
I think it's hard for us to know what the operator wants to do without the operator telling us what he wants to do. If we can develop mechanism that lets you create these filters, and you can put a wild card in any or all positions. I mean, you could wild card every single position in the filter, and then you filtered out everything. That it just comes down to the operator to use this mechanism in a sensible way.
So if I look at VoltCuddle and how my mind works, and that may or may not be how the operator works, right? I'm gonna want to be able to do things like VoltCuddle filter list, and then give it a device ID, right? And it'll list all the filters on that device ID. If I want to set a filter, it's going to be filter device ID, then a list of filters I want on it. And again, that's how I envision a CLI usage of it. How that translates to an API or whatever is different. I'm just trying to understand if there's a mentality around that we want to somehow shadow in the API or shadow even in the data structure. I do think we need to limit how quick we can look up a filter to, one or two hash key lookups.
Yeah, I agree with that. The goal should be that this structure fits in memory, and it's supportable with hash tables, and we should absolutely not have some huge linear search that searches through 10,000 filters to find the one you're interested in. It should be efficient. But to me, that comes down to, we can design what we put in the database, and as long as we sensibly come up with these, database specifications for what we want our data model to look like, we can design the efficient search around that when it's actually implemented in the component.
Right. And from the database, my problem is my mental operation is I want to see all the filters associated with this device. And if the device ID is an attribute on the filter, that's a complex search. I'm now searching the whole space. Right?
Well, I would say I mean, if we're talking an SQL query, it would be efficient. Show me all the records where device ID is set
Fair
to,
enough. Fair enough.
this value. So it's and again, that comes down to, you know, how it's implemented in the back end. You can do an efficient search on any field, I think. And I think from the APIs or from the CLI perspective, in VoltCuddle, you have add a filter, delete a filter, list filters, you know, and list filters would have an argument that would let you, you know, filter that filter list, you know, so list filters for device, for type of event, you know, the typical stuff we have in VoltCuddle for filtering results.
Yeah.
So
I just see again, if I want to list all the filters on a device, I'm walking all the filters, right? And in the current way, we're talking about storing it. However, if we stored it a different way, as the device is the first index, so I want to see all devices with filter Y, I'm walking the whole space again. Maybe there's just no way to get around walking the whole space.
yeah, I mean, if this was XOS, I would say, you know, we support things like SQL queries, you know, across the API, and that's efficient. But I know the VOLTHA APIs, we don't have this sort of SQL query-ish capability yet. And when we do a list in VoltCuddle, we typically, I think, download the whole thing and then post-filter it. So that kind of comes down to mechanism of a sort.
We do, but there's always been a requirement. I think there's actually JIRA saying we need server-side sorting and filtering, because when the system gets large, pulling all the data to the client and then sorting or filtering is not really the way you want this done.
Yeah, so that same JIRA can have a comment added says it needs to support event filters as well.
And it'll have a complete by never date, just like the current one.
A quick question. We're always talking about the event filtering as removing filtering, but do we expect the most devices to publish filter or not to? Because having it to be a whitelist instead of a blacklist may lead to a way smaller amount of data.
Well, again, where did we land on associating the device ID or a list of device IDs with a filter? Because either way, I guess you could have, you know, in that, is this a blacklist or a whitelist?
I mean, I think this might be best to construct it just like an access list. I mean, we're going to basically build out an access list of event filtering, and you can put in wildcards, or you can not put in wildcards, or you can put in specific events or not events, and we could have a very simple initial configuration that says these 5 event types for all allow through. And if somebody wants to come back later and modify that ACL to be, you know, wildly complicated, you know, up to a limit of, let's say, you know, 100,000 entries, you know, maybe that's the way to go. Maybe we don't get too clever about allowing per device storage. We just say, here's an access list of event filtering, do the right thing. And here's a recommended default configuration.
Like
so
that.
Matt, you would propose we add an allow or deny onto these filter specifications so they work just like an ACL?
Yeah, I mean, it just not try to be too specific in storing it even in any sort of way with the device. Literally have it as its own standalone set of event filters, and if, you know, processes like you would through a waterfall, or, you know, like an ACL through a waterfall. It's like if you go down the list and you sort them, and then if it hits, you're good, and if it doesn't hit, then it gets either default pass or default drop. And then the default would be like we've talked about, which is ultimately we don't filter on device because our default configuration doesn't filter on device. And here are the 5 events we really want to see, and that's the default configuration.
So go ahead.
So global on an OLT basis, we say, you know, of the 20 alarms or events that could be generated, the operator wants to see these 5, and then on the back end, I can say I want to just turn on and off a device from sending any alarms. If I turn it on, then it's limited to these 5. If I turn it off, it doesn't generate anything. Is that kind of what you're saying, or did I misinterpret that? I guess I misinterpreted that.
So if we have an ACL list, and that ACL list has 3 columns, filter, device ID, and allowed or deny. And if you have ** allow, then all events for all devices are published. If you have, add device * allow, then add device for all devices are there. If you have remove device and a device ID, whatever, you control it that way. And you have a default rule at the end of that list that says allow or deny, which means if you specify only one filter and allow it, and then the default rule is deny, you're only filtering, publishing one event over all devices. I think that's what Matt's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, you just have the flexibility to do the right thing, or, if you so choose to create, thousands of ACL entries at your peril, then, so be it. I cut off everything.
Yeah. I think we're gonna have to figure out how to, and I think I like that idea from a configuration point of view. I think from a lookup implementation point of view, how do I actually do the filter checks? We're gonna have to somehow optimize that. I'm not sure we'll be able to waterfall it in implementation, right? Just from a performance point of view. So we'll have to turn that structure into something that I can do a quick lookup on. But I like that.
I mean, yeah, that kind of flexibility also leads to more complexity. I mean, in general, blacklists and whitelists are a lot easier to understand, to process, just implement, in my opinion. I would have still favored a blacklist, but just this kind of ACL flexibility is, I don't know, is it too much that we are doing?
I've got to think operators were used to working with ACLs.
Router operators, yes. But I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, maybe a first pass at this might be, we don't allow every field to be filterable. So let's say the devices, maybe there's no way to specify the device at the first pass. Maybe all event or all entries in the ACL apply to all devices. And then you're basically just creating a very general list of these are the events I want to see or don't want to see across the board.
I actually think this is sort of less complex from a configuration standpoint and understanding what's going on than trying to do what we were doing before. We're having an event structure, and tie device IDs, and I don't know. It's not that different even, right? If you say, look, we're going to associate a device ID with a filter, that's all this is doing, or a filter or event type. That's all we're doing is we're saying there's an event type, which is a filter, a device ID, which could be * or device ID, and then allow or deny it. I mean, the one augmentation is what do we do with it when we match? So I'm not sure this is that different than what we talked about before, and to be honest, in my mind, at least, it's easier to understand.
Yeah, I think it has the advantage that it does fit existing abstractions. At least some people are used to dealing with the ACLs, and there might even be some existing work out there for ACL managers that we could use that would have efficient ways of doing the match, for example, that we don't have to invent some kind of matching engine. I do see with the ACL approach, I think we do have to keep them in order, right? So this does add a little bit of complexity because you want the rules to be processed in order. So maybe there's some management through VoltCuttle where we have to be able to reorder rules.
Well, that order, I mean, question is in the KV store, can we manage that order?
We can put an order field in each ACL entry and number in.
But
We
Yeah.
could, but ideally would we want the filters to be small enough to fit in memory, so we don't have to go to KV all the time.
No, what I mean is, does KV today have a capability to natively store things in order, or are we going to, as Scott said, we're going to have to add a priority or an order number to each one of these, so that when we pull it into memory, yeah,
it goes by keys, so it depends how we define the keys.
Well, that's the thing, right? ACLs have priorities, right? And it's possible that packets can match multiple rules in the ACL table, and that means the higher priority rule wins. Where is the need for doing all this priority business over here?
It's an order. It's an ordered list, and we've already said the priority is first match wins.
And just a time check, we're a few minutes past our allotted time. Are we near a point we can wrap up? Do we want to schedule some more time on Thursday?
Did you really just ask that question?
So I'm for moving forward with something, right? Even if there is no complete consensus on it, we've been talking about this forever now. So instead of introducing new variables right now with ACLs and priorities and ordering, I'm for getting something implemented, the simplest possible thing, and moving forward. And we can revisit it if it does not seem like it doesn't, meets everyone's needs, or there's something that needs to be enhanced.
I agree. I just think this ACL list is simpler than what we've been talking about.
How is it simpler than a blacklist? I don't get it.
We haven't been talking a blacklist. We haven't been talking a blacklist. We never have been talking just a blacklist.
David, I thought we'd been talking about a blacklist the whole time. So,
really, I thought we were talking about event filters, where I have an event filter and I say specify device on which I want that event to be filtered.
Yeah, it's basically a blacklist that says, this event on this device ID, I want it blacklisted.
So could we do this in a way that's future compatible? So for example, we support one syntax that might be very simple, like the one that's being suggested in the doc, and then come along later and add wildcard matching and other expressions that are more complicated without breaking the original. Is there a way we can just solve this in the near term with a basic syntax and then expand it later if the need exists?
What's the syntax? I'm looking at the screen right now. I don't see it.
So look at the number 2, keeping filters outside so you have something that's like, it allows you to set a specific device ID, and then maybe later on we let you specify the device ID as a wildcard or a range or something like that. I'm concurring with Saurav here. We need to get something in here, and I'm maybe not perfect, but if we get something that's forwards compatible, that might be one option.
Yeah, I see the second choice there with the device ID named as a form of indexing. I'd say the first one would be the one where it's stored, and then inside that is, again, a list of proto-defined filters, and whether or not there is complete flexibility in that proto to define every little thing we want to change, or maybe we start off with saying the initial device level filtering is all, and then later on we could change that all into a way to look up based on device or based on other event types.
So in this
storing
structure,
it, we just store it under service VOLTHA events, and then it's just a list of, list of events I want to see or events I don't want to see.
okay, we got. So I see service VOLTHA event filters and then / device ID. Are we talking about event filters / a device ID? Then under device ID, a list of filters that I want or don't want to see for that device ID?
I'm talking about, well, I'm saying specifically on the first one, it would not have device ID in the key path. It would just be event filters, and it would apply to, well, all devices by definition there. And then inside that list, there may be a field added later to filter by device ID. But it's not quote unquote indexed like it's shown in the second key entry. To me, the second key entry looks like just a form of indexing. Now I can do a quick lookup on a device ID level filter.
So under event filters, there would be a list of objects, which is each object is an event type which I'm filtering.
Right. And then maybe the default configuration for the field device ID would be all. And right now we just have no way to change it to anything other than all.
And those events that are listed under event filters, those are the ones that are going to be sent, or those are the ones that are going to be filtered out?
Let's say the default behavior is those are a yes, they match, and the default is drop.
I didn't follow that, Matt. Are you suggesting allow everything and then blacklist, or are you suggesting deny everything and then whitelist?
I think deny everything and whitelist is probably the right decision here, because it also forces various vendors, as they start making adapters, to use the right schema and not bypass and not write their own message types or event types. So I concur with Matt that this should be a drop by default, and then the filter is a whitelist.
Well, the only thing is if we eventually did per device filtering, then you may need the initial event that lets you know that the ONU was detected. You can't deny that one by default, otherwise you'll never learn about it and never populate.
Right. And maybe there's a default whitelist. It includes things like that.
Right, but if you allow that to be overridden, then the system stops working.
Oh, well, this gets back to, we can only prevent so much stupidity.
Yeah, we can't make a system that's free of foot guns.
You can't. It just can't do anything.
So Paul, do you have enough information to do an implementation? Look like it either needs another debate or another session, or it needs to have some examples around it
I'm just looking at how, I'm just looking at how we configure this. I'm still coming back to, if we don't have the flexibility to kind of do the allow, deny, filter, specify the event, and specify the device up front, you're never, it's not going to change, right? Because if you don't put that stuff in the protos today, you're talking about a proto change later on.
Yeah, I agree with David on that point.
Those are deadly.
Yeah, if we want an ACL, that should be engineered in from the beginning, because an ACL, it has this ordering requirement that is completely different than a blacklist or a whitelist that is unordered. So if we want an ACL, I think we should decide from the beginning. But I'm also with Saurav, I'm not convinced we need an ACL.
I'm not convinced we're not building an ACL. We're just doing it a different way, and somehow when it's done this way, we don't see it as an ACL. I mean, it's the same thing.
Well, to me, the difference is an ACL has both an allow and a deny, whereas
we've already said we need that. We need a default whitelist. That's an allow.
Yeah, I guess if the allow is anything other than allow everything for default, or the deny is anything other than deny everything, then we're implementing an ACL. If we somehow have both a whitelist and a blacklist at the same time, then we've created an ACL. But I think we are starting to lose people on this meeting. I see people dropping. So, I mean, we are over time.
So what you're saying is, right? If I keep hanging on, everybody else drops and I win. Is that what you're saying?
I think that works, David. If you can outlast us all.
Keep your hand on the van. Okay. Okay. Thursday, or what do we want to do?
I think we could continue the discussion on Thursday, and maybe use VOLTHA to swap some more thoughts in the meantime.
It may help to see the proto too.
Yeah.
I think if we could visualize the proto a little bit, we might be able to kind of settle down a little bit.
Yeah, Devmalia has a design doc on the that has the protos. So if we could have that ready to present as well next meeting, then we can take a look at that. Yeah, it's in the FCAPS folder. It's public, so anyone can look at it between now and then, and we can show it next time. I would suggest everyone think about this a little bit. Think about whether we need an ACL or a blacklist or a whitelist. If anyone can find the operator requirement that drove this, I think that would help a lot. And then let's, as long as that works for you, Devmalia, let's talk more on Thursday.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you, Devmalia. All right, with that, let me go ahead and stop the recording since we're over time, and we'll close today's meeting.